The armored warfare training grounds thundered with the rumble of engines by 0600 hours. Steel beasts crawling across the dusty terrain as dawn broke over Fort Ironclad. Elena Donovan adjusted her helmet strap and tucked her gloves into her belt, standing near the back of the tactical briefing room just left of the coffee station. She didn't lean against the wall or cross her arms. She simply stood, watching the screen at the front cycle through terrain maps and tactical overlays. Most of the data had been built from files Elena recognized intimately. She'd helped construct the original scenario months ago, a training simulation they now called Breach Point. Every angle of the maneuver, every trigger threshold buried in the simulation telemetry, she knew them all. But this morning her name wasn't even on the roster. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The names of the assigned tank commanders scrolled across the left panel in bright white text. Thomas Hammer Reynolds, Samantha Vortex Mitchell, Derek Anvil Foster. Each name carried a color-coded timestamp and designated vector run. Elena's name had been there earlier that week, tagged as tactical support. Now it was gone. Across the room, Thomas lifted a protein shake to his lips and said something to Samantha under his breath. She laughed without turning her head. Derek stood a few steps in front of them, reviewing his battle plan on a shoulder tablet, his tone louder than necessary. If we don't hit the point gap at maximum speed, we may as well stay in the garage. Breach is too narrow otherwise. You'll end up stalled in the kill zone. One of the younger tank operators nearby nodded like he understood. Elena didn't move. She had heard it all before. The shape of Breach Point required not just power and entry speed, but a pressure hold on the treads through unstable terrain for a full 30 seconds longer than what most tank operators could manage, without losing control or bogging down. The maneuver alone wasn't the challenge. It was sustaining through the turn while keeping weapon systems and tread tension in perfect balance. At the front of the room, Controller Morris, short and steady-voiced, adjusted his mic. Final simulation window begins in 21 minutes. Breach Point intercept profile is set with live environmental variation. All runs must maintain optimal tread tension to complete the trigger pass. If you lose momentum or pull back early, the enemy line will hold. You'll get one attempt. No one looked toward Elena. She didn't expect them to. Lieutenant Sarah Parker, with auburn hair tied in a tight bun, passed by without a word and slipped a print out into Elena's hand. Elena unfolded it slowly. It was a terrain model of the breach path, the kind she had annotated herself back when they were still testing soil composition models in low-ridge scenarios. It had no author listed. No one ever attached her name to those sheets. "Observe only today," Sarah murmured, keeping her voice low enough not to carry. "They've got you at Ridge Station 4. No comms, just eyes on." Elena nodded once, then folded the sheet again and slipped it into her uniform's front pocket. Sarah gave a faint apologetic shrug, then moved back toward the tactical console. Around them, the room continued its practiced energy. Samantha dropped into a chair near the front and kicked her boot up against the table leg. Thomas offered Derek a stick of gum, and the two of them traded half-jokes about the soil moisture throwing off tread calibration. The jokes weren't funny, but they carried status. Morris resumed. "Heads up. Tactical feed will go dark for 12 seconds during the approach. You'll be driving blind through the entry corridor. That's when most operators lose momentum." Elena had written that timing. She remembered the exact frame skip rate in the simulation log. She'd matched it against 6 real-world terrain records and adjusted the lag field herself. It wasn't a glitch. It was the test. But none of them knew that. The screen flashed the first call sign. Derek's name paired with Iron Thunder, launch at 0700, secondary at 0715. All others follow standard interval. Morris's voice remained calm. "Support personnel report to observation. If you're not assigned a comms unit, remain off-channel." Elena turned and walked toward the hallway before anyone could point her out. Her boots made no more noise than anyone else's, but the silence around her seemed different. Not dramatic, just complete. The ridge station wasn't far. A quarter-mile walk across gravel and temporary matting, past a line of barricades stacked low against the edge of the training path. The air was cool, dry, the wind too thin to carry scent. Elena kept her eyes forward. Two mechanics passed her going the opposite direction, one of them holding a diagnostic tablet like it was hot. Neither looked up. When she reached the observation post, no one greeted her inside. A row of folding chairs faced a wide viewport. There were scopes on pivot mounts. Long-range cameras pointed toward the valley where the breach would execute. Elena took a seat near the far end and opened the printout again. Her pen was tucked in her sleeve pocket. She made a small mark near the left edge, noting the shift in ground composition since the terrain modeling had been logged. Her handwriting was small and exact. It didn't matter if anyone saw it. No one would ask. Outside, a rumble passed low and vibrated through the tent's ceiling. Someone had started their engine pass early. Elena didn't flinch. She looked down at the profile sheet one more time, then folded it neatly and tucked it under her leg. There was no comms unit laid out for her, no feed line, no identifier on the clipboard. She didn't need any of it. The breach point wasn't theoretical for her. It never had been. She had solved it quietly, alone, and now, as the chatter built through the post walls, as the roar of the first simulation ramp-up hummed through the floor, she let herself blink once. Then she waited, knowing that in less than an hour, everything would change. The tank simulators came to life before sunrise, long before the scheduled test operators arrived. Fluorescent lights in the training bay buzzed with their usual low electric hum, casting pale halos across the polished floor. Elena always arrived by 0500. No badge swipe, no official check-in. Sarah, the sim technician on morning rotation, had long since stopped asking questions. The access key card was left under a data console each day, tucked into the lip of a diagnostic tray. Unspoken. It was a quiet allowance between two people who understood the difference between being included and being necessary. Elena stepped into Simulator 6 with a calm that came from ritual. The tank control module was identical to the M1A2 Abrams interface. Every dial mapped, every resistance lever precise to real-world tolerances. She settled in without ceremony. The door sealed behind her with a soft hydraulic pull. Darkness took over for a moment, broken only by the blue pulse of the tactical display initializing. She didn't flinch. She never did. The system accepted her Ghost ID without delay. Her screen blinked once, then welcomed a blank operator tag. No rank, no name, just the number she always entered at the prompt. 427. She had used it for weeks now. The logs fed straight into the archive, unfiled. No one had flagged it. Elena adjusted the seat fitment, slightly tighter at the waist, then ran a warm-up sequence at moderate terrain difficulty. The pressure indicators rolled clean, no feedback warnings. She tracked the breach arc on the terrain model overlay. 68 seconds, entry to apex. Lock acquisition required at 31. 5 seconds. Target exposure window less than 5 seconds. She didn't blink. Her first run of the day was methodical, clean. A slight deviation at the rear tread pressure curve. She corrected on the second run. She leaned the angle 3 degrees tighter at maximum speed. The display flashed yellow. She smiled faintly, then adjusted her terrain sensitivity settings by 0.5%. By the fifth run, she held maximum tread tension for 35 seconds. The trajectory stayed blue through the corridor. The enemy line target stayed in cone until the final approach dropped altitude. In a real-world sim, that would be a pass. She wanted more. Each session ran between 1 and 2 hours. She left no notes. She saved the telemetry files directly to her drive, which fit inside a case small enough to tuck behind her uniform's chest pocket. The telemetry held everything. Ground pressure, tread displacement, breath rhythm under stress, micro-corrections to the controls during unstable terrain. Every run had a profile. Every profile had a flaw, except the last one. That one was perfect. In the quiet that followed her sessions, she often walked the length of the empty locker corridor. Just once, letting her eyes fall on the untouched name patches and framed commendation boards. There were no boards with her name. There were no ribbons to mark simulation breakthroughs or breach timing reductions. The sim room never gave applause. But the numbers did not lie. She ran a pen along the inside of her equipment bag and checked the printed overlays one more time. The final sheet, annotated with her tight scroll in dark ink, held her best run. Maximum speed for 37. 8 seconds. Lock never broken. Maneuver complete. She hadn't signed it, she never did. The data itself told the story. One morning, during a double breach analysis, Elena noticed someone standing just outside the sim window. A younger systems officer named James was holding a diagnostic slate, watching her telemetry scroll in real time. His eyes followed the shifting axis markers as if he understood what he was seeing. She didn't pause the run. She held through the peak compression, let the flare timing play out, and exited clean. When the sim opened and she stepped out, James didn't speak. He just nodded once, low and slow, then walked away. He never brought it up again. Back in her locker space, Elena kept her things ordered by necessity, not vanity. Her name was etched faintly on the inside seam of her duffel. Not printed, just carved there with a blunt stylus. A memory stick hung from a loop of red paracord. It held all 42 breach point runs. She plugged it in every night. She reviewed the analytics line by line. She had no instructors. She corrected herself. Her gloves, folded and tucked into the side panel, had creases now at the index fingers where she had gripped the controls too tightly during early drills. She had learned to let that go. You couldn't fight the terrain, you had to ride it. Let your breath fall into sync with the track rhythm, let your lungs follow the pressure. She had memorized the moment when tunnel vision tried to creep in. It was not about toughness, it was about timing. Oxygen, angle, blink rate, muscle release. She mapped it like a pulse chart. Sarah once left a small packet of electrolyte powder near the sim panel. No note, just the packet. It was strawberry. Elena took it without a word and never mentioned it. On her way out, she left a telemetry stub behind, labeled Simron 427 Breach 26. Sarah never filed it, but she kept it. They both knew what it meant. The official squadron runs never asked for outside data. When Thomas or Samantha reviewed their sim plans, they used only the default curves. They practiced for standard speed holds, maybe a slight increase on a strong day. Elena watched them drive loose in the entry corridor, trusting autocorrect to keep them from stalling out. She had run the breach tighter than the curve allowed twice and survived both runs without traction assist. That detail never made it to briefing. In the end, she didn't train for approval. She trained because the maneuver demanded it. There were no shortcuts inside a high-pressure corridor. You either drove it clean, or you failed. You either understood the shape of the breach, or you stalled out before the target flashed red. There was no middle ground. She knew that space better than anyone. She had built her way through it one silent morning at a time. And no one saw her. Not then. Not yet. But the breach remembered. And so did the numbers. Inside the command post, tension had begun to override rhythm. The air was still cool, but the mood was heating fast. Operators leaned over their terminals, tracking pressure readings and projected telemetry arcs. Everything was being logged in real time, each tank path a thread of possibility weaving through the larger simulation. A bank of monitors showed multi-angle feeds, cockpit views, trajectory overlays, and sensor locks that pulsed green, then yellow, then red. Controller Morris stood with his headset tilted just above one ear, his voice steady but clipped. He watched the approach window flash, counting down the intercept window with quiet urgency. This was the point in the drill where either the maneuver worked or the enemy line held. Breach point wasn't a tactical flourish. It was the only maneuver fast enough to cut a hard-point defensive position off at the merge. That was the simulation. And it was already starting to slip. Iron Thunder approaching apex, someone called out. That was Derek. His Abrams was mid-breach, diving into the low corridor at maximum speed. Treads steady, but just at the edge of optimal tension. Pressure holding, a second voice confirmed. Telemetry spike. Morris muttered into his headset. On screen, Derek's pressure readings jumped again. The arc bent early. His vitals spiked. He tried to hold the controls steady. Warning light on. Tread slippage. Loss of momentum, said the monitoring tech. The screen flickered. Derek's Abrams ejected from the sim scenario. The system logged it as a fail and reset his operator feed to standby. His seat back in the sim bay was already empty by the time anyone looked up from the console. Silence took over the room for just a moment. Then Samantha keyed in from the secondary bay. Steel cyclone, taking lead. Approaching hot. Her tone was confident. Maybe too confident. Her entry speed was high. Aggressive. But the angle was off. She hit the breach late, forcing the sim to compress the vertical climb early. She's wide. Lock loss at Corridor 3. Correction curves out of range. Breakthrough time? Someone asked. Not happening. She's missed it. The red flash on Samantha's tactical display triggered early. She had overshot. Her trajectory ended in a stall mark with no contact. Another failure. Morris looked at the screen that showed remaining slotted runs. Only Thomas remained. His call sign, Steel Hammer, was already transmitting. Steel Hammer active, beginning approach. He came in smooth, right on the vector Elena had written months ago. His tread tension was stable. Not aggressive, but enough to approach the corridor clean. He maintained momentum, then a slight hiccup. Vertical stutter, Morris said. Hold the curve, someone muttered. Then Thomas's voice came over the channel, low and measured. I'm pulling back. The lock dissolved. The maneuver flattened. He dropped speed and powered out. What was that? Morris asked. I wasn't about to blow the transmission chasing a drill, Thomas answered. No breach, a tech confirmed. The enemy line is holding. On screen, the simulation logged a tactical failure. The virtual enemy line remained unbroken. No secondary runs available. No operators left on the board. Morris stepped back from the screen and let his shoulders drop. The abort light began to pulse on the control panel. Operators exchanged looks. The sim had been built with an override buffer, but it would trigger mission failure confirmation unless someone re-entered the breach in less than 60 seconds. No one was cleared. Sarah, standing near the peripheral monitor, checked the file status. Every official operator was locked out. The next reset window wasn't for another 20 minutes. Morris reached toward the abort switch. That was when the static broke. A voice, steady and quiet, entered the comm line. I have the vector. The operators all looked up at once. The voice hadn't come from any of the sim bay. There was no operator listed as active. The comm line blinked green from Ridge Station 4. Morris pressed his headset tighter. Say again? Elena's voice came through clearer this time. I said I have the vector. Who is this? Another controller snapped. You're not cleared. That zone's observer only. Enemy line is at breakthrough threshold, Elena said. I'm already mobile. At first, no one responded. The tactical display began to populate a new heat signature coming in low from the left flank of the terrain map. It wasn't scheduled. It didn't match any call sign. It rode the exact entry arc required for the breach point. But tighter. Lower. The pressure readings began to stack. Who authorized this run? Morris barked. There's no clearance logged. The heat signature registered as Ghost 4. Who the hell is Ghost 4? A tech asked. The telemetry fed into the mainframe. Clean. Uncorrupted. The speed matched the breach parameters. The tactical overlay showed a sharp climb. Pressure readings nearing optimal and climbing. Ghost 4, identify yourself, Morris said. No reply. The screen showed the entry complete. Apex lock acquired. She's in the breach, Sarah whispered. Nobody moved. The radar tracked Ghost 4's arc as it curved precisely into the compressed segment of the terrain model, the same place Derek had stalled out. The pressure curve rose again, nearing maximum sustainable tread tension. She's holding, said James from behind the analytics table. She's actually holding maximum tension. The abort light froze. The operator who had reached for the switch stepped back. Ghost 4 held lock through the final corridor. The target flare triggered from the tank's forward position. The enemy line's protocol engaged. Inside the sim, the red beacon showed line collapse, then breakthrough. The enemy position neutralized. Silence filled the command post. Morris looked around the room. What just happened? No one answered. Every operator seat was empty. Every controller still had their headset in place. The mission log updated once more, showing a completed breach under callsign Ghost 4. Thomas leaned in over the edge of the screen and said it. Not loud, but not soft either. Who drove that? The radar faded. The room stayed quiet. And somewhere over the terrain grid, Elena's voice clicked out of the channel. No fanfare. No command call. Just one final line. Returning to base. In the observation post at Ridge Station 4, Elena's chair sat empty. Still warm. Her printout was gone, but everyone in the command post had heard her voice, had watched the impossible happen on their screens. Someone had just breached the point perfectly. And they had no idea who. The terrain opened in a silent sweep below her, its jagged contours rendered in perfect resolution against the sim's synthetic sky. Elena's Abrams cut through it low, almost scraping the valley floor with its treads, riding the entry arc at an angle too shallow for most operators to stabilize. Her tactical display blinked red across the top edge. Pressure climbing. Ground offset registering sharp right. Lock window approaching. Inside the command post, operators stared at the telemetry feed in growing stillness. Ghost 4 had no listed operator. No pre-filed approach. Yet the signal was clean. Her entry speed was optimal. Thrust output steady from the moment her tank appeared on the screen. Nothing faltered. The arc she drove traced the inside curve of the breach point tighter than any recorded simulation to date, said Sarah from her station, her voice low, almost reverent. Morris didn't reply. He was watching the pressure indicator, tracking the numbers rising faster than expected. Elena adjusted pitch with the subtlest correction, pulling into the high-pressure segment of the breach with surgical precision. Her left hand nudged the throttle down just enough to edge the timing into the pocket. The tactical warning pulsed again. High load threshold. No shake in the controls. No waver in breath rate. Her vitals held flat. Steady. Inside the sim, the terrain wrapped tighter. Most operators would have lost control. Her vision stayed sharp. Her suit compressed perfectly around her torso. The oxygen regulator feeding just fast enough to counteract the darkness creeping in at the edges of her eyes. She held it. The lock cone on her tactical display turned solid blue. In the telemetry stream, the phrase "Target Lock True" blinked on 3 separate feeds. Elena's Abrams reached the apex of the breach with flawless control. Her treads adjusted slightly, timing the bank with a pre-mapped terrain shift built into the sim code months ago. She knew it was there. She had placed it herself, buried in the parameters to mimic real-world physics. No one else had noticed. 300 meters from the enemy line model, she triggered a single tactical burst. The bright streak cut across the visual feed, trailing in an arc just inside the failsafe envelope. The enemy line responded immediately. Its protocol flared. Defensive systems override engaged. It began to break. The line spun, lost cohesion, and collapsed. Inside the command post, the red threat indicator blinked once, then vanished. Neutralized. Breach successful. No damage to the operator. No further action required. Someone let out a breath. Another operator whispered, "What was that?" No one answered. Elena didn't wait for confirmation. Her Abrams climbed out of the corridor with clean velocity, engine heat blooming across the thermal map in an even wave. She didn't pull hard. She didn't show off. She simply climbed. The silhouette of her tank broke through the upper ridgeline as the breach sequence closed. From the outside, it looked like a simple exit. No trail of dust. No sweeping bank. Just a single engine climb through simulated terrain. Treads level. Inside her cockpit, the tactical display cooled to green. Pressure dropped. Her vitals stayed unchanged. She had not spoken once. In the telemetry archive, the word "complete" logged beside her run. A single line. Operator ID, Ghost 4. Pressure held. Maximum sustainable. Lock duration. Full. Outcome. Successful breach. Override protocol. Not triggered. Inside the simulation compound, the remaining operators who had watched their own runs collapse into failure stood in silence. Thomas stared at the screen, jaw tight. Derek was still seated on the edge of the secondary terminal, his headset hanging from his fingers. Samantha didn't say a word. She held it, someone said from the back. Morris crossed his arms. No one else even came close. James, who had slipped in halfway through the run, tapped the telemetry line and zoomed in on the tactical timing. Look at that. She released exactly 2 seconds before protocol lock. Right at the edge. She didn't even need to fire, Sarah said. She didn't have to, James replied. She made the system shut itself down. In the air, Elena's tank banked slightly toward the right vector, aligning with a soft return path. Her voice never entered the comms again. No request for debrief. No demand for validation. One operator leaned toward the tactical screen and whispered, "Who drove that?" No one had an answer. The mission board still showed her as unassigned. Her name didn't appear anywhere official. But the signature was there. The maneuver was real. And it had happened in full view of every system running. Morris stepped back from the screen and let the data speak. The log remained untouched. The outcome couldn't be challenged. She had done it. She had solved it. Live. In the corner of the room, someone replayed the breach on split screen. The Abrams angle through the corridor played out again. A perfect arc against the simulated terrain. The enemy line reacting too late. A streak of light. A signal collapse. And then, just sky. Outside, the early morning light pressed faintly through the tinted glass of the sim compound. The clouds were starting to rise, casting soft shadows over the training pad. A single dust trail marked the ground above the breach corridor. No one knew where she had come from. But everyone knew what she had done. The impossible had just happened. And they had all witnessed it. The sim archive was still running a full diagnostic when James pulled the telemetry feed from the mainframe. He stood over the terminal, eyes locked on the stream of clean data scrolling upward in green text. No lag, no interference. Every detail fed back into the record as if it had always been there. Except the name. The call sign was Ghost 4. Operator ID, blank. Clearance, none. Completion, 100. 0%. He didn't speak at first. He just stared at the breach metrics, watching the line labeled lock duration stay flat all the way through. Maximum sustainable pressure. No instability. No loss of control. Tactical release at 2 seconds. Enemy line neutralized. Thomas pushed past him, half angry, half confused. Pull the override. That run wasn't cleared. We don't know who drove it. James didn't move. It was a ghost profile, he said quietly. Not new. This isn't the first breach logged under that ID. Thomas frowned. Then it's some training plant. A test run from ops. Sarah walked over without a word and handed Morris a folded printout. The page was thick. Corner slightly creased, already marked up in pen. Morris opened it carefully. At the top was a terrain arc, a breach point rendering. Beneath it, a pressure chart annotated in tight handwriting. Entry speed, apex lock, tactical trigger, exit climb. He studied the curve. The exact match. Sarah's voice was low. She wrote that 3 weeks ago. Morris looked up at her. Sarah nodded once. She drove it in the pod, every morning before they showed up. Thomas snatched the page. His eyes skimmed the notations, then narrowed. Where's the signature? There isn't one. Sarah said. She never signed any of them. A second tech at the archive console leaned forward, tapping a key to expand the override log. One redacted entry blinked open with a soft tone. Override access. Donovan. Everyone fell silent. Thomas stepped back, one hand curling into a fist near his leg. That's not possible, he said. She doesn't have operational clearance. She's not even on the sim rotation. She was, James said. 6 weeks ago. Listed as support, then removed. Morris didn't look up from the tactical timing printout. She ran the breach more times than any of us. Derek leaned over a second screen, watching the replay file run on loop. He said nothing, just let it play. The tactical burst. The target lock. The enemy line collapsed. Every time it cycled the same outcome, no deviation. She drove it like she'd done it 100 times, someone said from the side. Morris answered without lifting his eyes, because she has. Samantha stepped in from the hallway, jacket half-zipped. Her expression had dropped from sharp to uncertain. She looked from the file to the screen, then to the line on the mission board where Thomas's name still held the top slot. Below it, a gap. No label. No entry. The sim system had logged Elena's run as complete, but it had never assigned her a rank. What are we supposed to do with that? She asked. Thomas snapped the paper in his hand. You can't let her get away with this. She hijacked a live simulation. She drove without clearance. She solved the breach, Sarah said, and she saved the mission. That's not the point, Thomas snapped. Isn't it? James cut in. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise. The sim feed was still open behind him. Ghost 4. 100. 0%. Final result confirmed. James crossed his arms. You drove at standard pressure. You pulled early. She held maximum tension. Clean. Thomas's jaw tightened. She wasn't even supposed to be in the field. She didn't ask permission, Morris replied. She just drove. The weight of the words settled across the post. On the back monitor, the breach point arc replayed again. Elena's path traced its way across the terrain model in a perfect bow. The lock held. The tactical burst glowed. Then, the target dissolved. Every frame exact. Someone brought up the archive listing. The breach data stretched back over 30 days. Dozens of runs, all logged under the same tag. No errors, no training flags, no debrief requests. She solved it first, Sarah said. James nodded. We just didn't see it. Morris exhaled slowly and turned toward the terminal. He typed one line into the mission record. No announcement. No fanfare. Operator Donovan. Status. Complete. Behind him, the operators moved in quiet agreement. One by one, they began adjusting the data logs. The names shifted. The stats reordered. Thomas's failure moved to line 2. Samantha's overshoot to 3. Derek's stall out to 4. Ghost 4 became the new line 1. No one argued. The post held a stillness that didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the moment just after truth arrives. Too late to prepare for. Too clean to deny. Thomas stared once more at the board, then turned and walked out without speaking. Samantha didn't follow. Derek sat back in his chair and let the sim footage play again. James walked to the far console, opened the sim record, and saved a backup copy to his drive. No one spoke for a long time. Only the soft hum of the systems remained, and the faint click of Sarah resetting the terminal for the next round. Not that it would matter. There would be no better run today. Elena had already finished the breach and left them all watching. The sim bay was dark, except for the blue glow of one terminal screen still blinking on standby. Most of the building had emptied out hours ago. The official debrief had ended just past 2,300. By then, the replays had been watched twice, the mission logs had been archived, and every operator had walked out slower than they came in. But James had stayed. Something about the silence in the room pulled at him. He stepped inside quietly, not sure what he was looking for. The air was still faintly warm, the kind of heat left behind by systems running at full load. Simulator 6, the one furthest down the row, was cracked open an inch. The console beside it showed no user ID, just an unfiled session logged as Ghost 4. He moved to the console. A memory stick sat in the slot, the red light on its side still blinking, still active, still warm. He didn't remove it. He touched the key once, and the sim session loaded. The Breachpoint file appeared at full render. It opened instantly. No password, no encryption. He read the name in the header line. Not a code this time, not a number. Just one word. Donovan. The data filled the screen. Full breach trajectory. Pressure log peaking at maximum tension and holding steady for 37.8 seconds. Target lock held. Tactical timing exact. Completion rating, 100. 0%. No assist. No automated correction. No fallback routine. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just stood there watching the numbers run again. Watching the shape of the arc play out in green lines across a black background. Quiet as breath. Every second was intentional. Every motion deliberate. It was her, beginning to end. Outside, a soft vibration passed through the floor. He turned. Through the side windows of the bay, past the line of empty gear carts and closed hangar doors, a tank moved across the far training ground. No lights. No tower request. No beacon ID. It moved smooth and fast, its shape familiar even in silhouette. Abrams, one of the base vehicles, stripped of call sign, treads already churning up dust. He stepped to the glass and watched. The engine flared once in the distance, then the tank rose clean over a ridge, its profile cutting through the lower dust cloud without sound. It climbed at a soft angle. Not showy, not urgent, but with certainty. The kind that didn't ask permission. On the command deck above the sim compound, Sarah stood with her jacket zipped to the chin, her hands in her pockets. She saw it too. No headset. No contact. Just the single trail climbing through the dark. She didn't reach for the radio. She just watched. The terminal beside James gave a final beep. The session closed. The screen returned to standby. The memory stick light blinked once more, then went dark. He left it there. In the locker room, one cabinet remained open. Inside, a folded uniform sat clean on the shelf, gloves resting neatly above it. No name on the tag. No patch on the sleeve. Just the faint indent of wear. The boots were gone. Someone had cleared out without making noise. There was no note. No trail. No message left on the board. Only the record and the silence that followed. On the ops deck, the team that had once joked about who could hold the breach the longest now sat scattered. None of them speaking. The breach had been held. Not by any of them. Morris had archived the result himself. Operator Donovan. Mission complete. There would be meetings, protocols reviewed, questions raised about oversight, access, clearance. But none of that could undo what had already happened, because it had happened in front of all of them. And it had happened clean. By the time the control tower filed its midnight report, the unidentified vehicle had already cleared range. No path filed. No tracking beacon active. But the radar confirmed a single Abrams exiting at controlled speed, course unknown. The night air outside the bay was still cool. Not quite cold. Above the sim roofline, the dust trail cut through the darkness like a soft line drawn with certainty. She had left the record, not the explanation. Her name had never needed the board. And now, without a word, she was gone. But they would remember. The briefing room felt different the next morning. Word had spread overnight through unofficial channels. Whispered conversations in the mess hall. Hurried text messages between operators. Hushed phone calls to friends at other bases. By 0600, the story had taken on a life of its own. Ghost operator executes perfect breach point. Unknown driver breaks enemy line. Simulation mystery. Abrams disappears after flawless run. Colonel William Stevens arrived at 0630, his face stern and his stride purposeful. He wasn't supposed to be there. The breach point was a training exercise, not a command-level operation. But when word reached him that an unauthorized operator had hijacked a live simulation and then vanished, he made it his business. Morris stood at attention as Stevens entered the command post. The morning shift was already in place, but the energy was subdued. Everyone knew what was coming. "Explain to me," Stevens said without preamble, "how someone drives an unauthorized mission using our equipment, our simulation, and our training ground, and then disappears without a trace." Morris cleared his throat. "Sir, the operator in question executed a successful breachpoint intercept. Mission parameters were met. The enemy line was neutralized." "That's not what I asked, Controller Morris." Stevens's voice was ice. "I asked how it happened." The room fell silent. Stevens's eyes swept across the assembled personnel. Morris, Sarah, James, and several other techs. Thomas, Samantha, and Derek stood near the back, their expressions carefully neutral. "The driver identified as Ghost 4, Morris continued, accessed the simulation during an active training exercise. Based on telemetry analysis, the execution was flawless. No safety protocols were violated." "No safety protocols?" Stevens' eyebrows rose. "An unidentified operator takes control of a live simulation, drives without clearance, and vanishes without debrief. And you're telling me no protocols were violated?" Sarah stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, the operator in question has been training on the simulation for weeks. The access was unofficial, but the competency was verified." "Unofficial access?" Stevens turned to her. "You mean unauthorized?" "Yes, sir." "And you allowed this?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "The driver demonstrated exceptional skills, sir, far beyond the capabilities of our scheduled operators." "That's not your call to make, Lieutenant Parker." Thomas couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Sir, with respect, this operator made a mockery of the entire exercise. She bypassed command structure, ignored clearance protocols, and showed off at the expense of legitimate drivers." Stevens' gaze shifted to Thomas. "She?" The word hung in the air. Thomas realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. "You know who this operator is?" Stevens said. It wasn't a question. James stepped forward, a tablet in his hand. "Sir, I have the complete telemetry data from yesterday's exercise. All 3 authorized operators failed to complete the breach point. The unauthorized operator, call sign Ghost 4, executed the maneuver perfectly. Maximum pressure sustained. Full lock duration. Clean breach." Stevens took the tablet and reviewed the data. His expression remained unreadable. "Operator identification?" "Donovan, sir," Sarah said quietly. "Elena Donovan. Former SIM support. Currently unassigned." "Where is she now?" "Unknown, sir. She left base last night. No vehicle plan filed." Stevens handed the tablet back to James. "So let me understand this. A driver with no current assignment, no operational clearance, and no authorization executed a maneuver that 3 of our active operators failed to complete. Then she disappeared. That's correct, sir?" Patterson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was measured. "Bring me everything, every sim log, every training record, every piece of data related to this operator and the breach point exercise. I want a complete analysis on my desk by 1400. "Yes, sir." "And I want Donovan found. Issue a recall order. She's to report for immediate debrief." Morris nodded. "We'll put out the word, sir. You'll do more than that, Controller. You'll make it clear that unauthorized access to military simulations is a serious offense. There will be consequences." But even as Stevens spoke, everyone in the room knew the truth. Elena Donovan had done something none of them could do. She had solved the unsolvable, executed the impossible, and proven that sometimes the best tank operator isn't the one with the highest rank or the most clearances. She was the one who could drive. As Stevens left the briefing room, Sarah turned to James. "Think they'll find her?" James shook his head. "She's been invisible for weeks. Why would that change now?" Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows across the training ground. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of tank engines echoed across the base. But the distinctive rumble of an Abrams executing a perfect breach point was nowhere to be heard. Elena Donovan had made her point. Now she was gone. The training facility had never felt so quiet, yet so charged with unspoken tension. Over the next few days, the story of Ghost 4 spread through the ranks like wildfire. Rumors morphed into legends. Legends into myths. Some said Elena had been a prodigy who'd been passed over for promotion because she refused to play politics. Others claimed she was a test driver for an experimental program who'd gone rogue. No one knew the full truth, but everyone had a theory. While the brass conducted their investigation, a curious change was taking place among the tank operators. The swagger was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful. The posturing faded as operators spent more time in the simulators, less time boasting. Something fundamental had shifted in their understanding of excellence. 4 days after the incident, Thomas found James in the archives, poring over Elena's telemetry data. "Still obsessing over Ghost 4? Thomas asked, his voice lacking its usual edge. James didn't look up. "Learning from her, actually. Her technique was revolutionary. Look at these micro-adjustments during the terrain shift. She's not fighting the physics, she's working with it." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then asked, "How did she do it? How did she hold maximum pressure for nearly 40 seconds without losing control?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." James expanded a chart on his screen. "She developed a breathing pattern that synchronized with the tread rhythm. Treated the tank like an extension of her body, not a machine to be conquered." Thomas took a seat, his eyes fixed on the data. "I've been in tanks for 12 years. Never seen anything like it." "That's because you were taught to dominate the machine. She learned to dance with it." "Can it be taught?" James finally looked up. "Are you asking for yourself, Reynolds?" Thomas nodded, a hint of humility crossing his features. "I want to understand." It was the first crack in the armor of the old guard. By week's end, even Samantha and Derek were studying Elena's runs, trying to reverse engineer her approach. The command staff noticed. The recall order for Elena remained active, but the tone had shifted from punitive to recruitment. Colonel Stevens called Morris into his office on the 8th day after the incident. "Our investigation has concluded," Stevens said, sliding a folder across his desk. Morris picked it up. "The findings, sir? Unauthorized access to training facilities by qualified personnel, resulting in successful mission completion. No disciplinary action?" "None recommended." Stevens leaned back in his chair. "Partly because there's no one left to discipline, but mostly because what she demonstrated represents a breakthrough in tank operation technique." Morris nodded, understanding the implications. "You want her back." "The Army needs operators like Donovan, not just for what she can do, but for what she can teach others." "If we can find her." Stevens' expression softened slightly. "The recall has been reframed as an invitation. Full reinstatement, promotion to sergeant, lead training position. Do you think she'll respond? Would you, after being sidelined and ignored?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Back in the sim bay, James had set up a training program based on Elena's techniques. The first class had 6 operators, including Thomas, Samantha, and Derek. None of them made jokes anymore about soil composition or tread calibration. They listened, practiced, failed, and tried again. The breakthrough didn't come quickly, but when Thomas held maximum pressure for 20 seconds without traction loss, the entire room broke into applause. Sarah watched from the doorway, a small smile on her face. "Progress," she said as James joined her. "Small steps," he agreed. "But they're learning. They needed their world shaken, needed to see what was possible." James nodded. "Sometimes that's the only way forward. Someone has to shatter the ceiling so others can see the sky." 3 weeks after the incident, an unmarked package arrived at the training facility. No return address, no note. Inside was a single memory stick with a red paracord loop. Morris brought it directly to James. "Think it's from her?" Morris asked. James plugged it in. The drive contained a single file labeled, "For those who want to learn." Inside was a complete training protocol, entry methods, breathing techniques, pressure distribution maps, control synchronization patterns. Everything Elena had developed, meticulously documented. "It's from her," James confirmed. "This is her way of saying goodbye." "Or her way of teaching," Sarah suggested from behind them, even from a distance. The training protocol was implemented immediately. Results followed quickly. Breach point completion rates rose from 15% to 47% in the first month. By the third month, 68% of operators could successfully execute the maneuver. The enemy line breakthrough simulation, once considered nearly impossible, became a standard training module. 6 months later, James was transferred to the Advanced Combat Training Division. His mission: develop a comprehensive program based on Elena's methods. On his last day at Fort Ironclad, Sarah handed him a small envelope. "This came for you," she said. "No sender information." Inside was a handwritten note on plain paper. The handwriting was small, precise, familiar. The breach was never about breaking the line. It was about understanding that some barriers only fall when you stop seeing them as barriers. Keep teaching them to see differently. E.D. James smiled and tucked the note into his pocket. He never showed it to anyone else. Some messages weren't meant to be shared. Some truths were personal. The legend of Ghost 4 continued to grow over the following years. As operators trained in the Donovan method spread throughout the Army, stories emerged of a mysterious tank driver appearing during crucial exercises. Perfect execution of impossible maneuvers. No identification, no communication, no trace. Always the same pattern. Arrive unannounced, execute flawlessly, disappear without explanation. The drivers who witnessed these events never filed official reports, but they talked among themselves in quiet corners of mess halls and barracks. They called her the breach driver, or sometimes just Ghost. Some claimed she was a test driver for a classified program. Others insisted she was a former operator who'd gone independent. James knew better. He recognized the driving patterns, the pressure signatures, the impossible precision. It was Elena Donovan. Still driving. Still perfect. Still proving that the best operators don't need recognition or rank or official approval. They just need to drive. On a quiet Tuesday morning, 3 years after the original Breachpoint incident, James received an encrypted file in his official email. No sender information. No message. Just a single video file labeled Breach 153. He opened it in his private office, door locked, volume low. The footage showed an Abrams executing a breach point at night over real terrain, not simulation. The pressure readings in the corner of the screen peaked higher than anyone had ever achieved. The maneuver was flawless, the timing perfect. The execution beyond standard capability. At the end of the video, just before the tank climbed out of frame, the tactical display showed a brief message. "Still driving, still perfect. -ED. James smiled and deleted the file. Some legends don't need proof. Some drivers don't need recognition. Some truths are powerful enough to speak for themselves. Elena Donovan had shown them all that real excellence doesn't ask for permission. It simply is. She had proven that the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who train in silence and perfect their craft alone, are often the ones who can do the impossible when it matters most. She was never picked. Never announced, never handed a call sign or a headline. But when everything faltered, she drove. While others trained for the spotlight, she prepared for the moment. Alone. Unseen. And when it came, she didn't ask permission. She simply held the line. Years later, when new operators asked about the breach point record, instructors would pull up the telemetry data from Ghost 4. They wouldn't mention her name. Most didn't know it, but they would point to the perfect arc, the sustained pressure, the flawless execution, and say simply, "This is what perfection looks like." What Elena proved was not just mastery of a maneuver, but something deeper. The quiet strength of someone who knows exactly what they can do, and does it without applause. This wasn't about recognition, it was about truth. Her truth held steady through maximum pressure, in silence. Maybe you know someone like her. Maybe you are her. Someone who perfects their craft in the quiet hours. who prepares not for glory but for the moment when excellence is demanded. Someone who understands that the loudest achievements often come from the quietest preparation. The base remembers what the scoreboards forget. And legends like Elena Donovan remind us that real greatness doesn't need permission. It just needs the courage to drive. The Donovan method revolutionized tank warfare training across all military branches. What began as one woman's solitary pursuit of excellence had evolved into a fundamental shift in combat doctrine. Academies that once prized brute force now taught synchronicity. Instructors who had demanded dominance now emphasized harmony. The language of tank operation itself transformed, less about conquering the machine and more about becoming one with it. 3 years after Elena's disappearance, the military deployed the 1st Battalion trained entirely in her methods. Operation Sandstorm, a multinational exercise designed to test breakthrough capabilities against fortified positions. 26 nations participated, each bringing their elite armored divisions. The Americans brought the 7th Armored, nicknamed Ghost Battalion, in quiet reverence to their spiritual founder. James attended as a technical advisor, stationed in the command center overlooking the vast desert training ground. The air hummed with anticipation as teams prepared for the exercise, dust rising from dozens of tanks moving into position. The mission seemed impossible. Breach 3 consecutive hardened defensive lines, each more formidable than the last. "First line deployed," announced the exercise controller. "All units in position." On the massive tactical display, blue markers represented friendly forces, red the opposing fortified positions. The simulation was live fire with practice rounds, but the defensive systems were fully operational. Breaking through would require perfect execution under genuine combat conditions. Phase 1 commences in 30 seconds, the controller continued. "All units, final checks." James watched the American formation take shape on the tactical screen. Unlike the traditional wedge configurations favored by other nations, the 7th arranged into what had become known as the Donovan pattern, a fluid, asymmetrical formation that appeared disorganized to untrained eyes but maximized adaptive potential. "Pressure looks good across the board," murmured Sarah, now a major and the battalion's executive officer. "Ghost lead is green." The countdown reached 0. The exercise began. Other nations launched with thunderous aggression, tanks charging forward with maximum power, attempting to overwhelm the defenses through sheer force. Their approach kicked up massive dust clouds, their cannons blazing with practice rounds. The Ghost Battalion waited. "What are they doing?" demanded an observer from the European contingent. "They're losing precious time." James exchanged knowing glances with Sarah but said nothing. They watched as the Ghost tanks remained stationary for precisely 17 seconds, allowing the dust cloud from other divisions to settle into specific patterns, creating momentary corridors of visibility that conventional tactics ignored. Then, with synchronized precision, the Ghost Battalion moved, not with roaring engines and churning treads, but with measured acceleration that minimized ground disturbance. They weren't racing to the defensive line, they were dancing toward it, maintaining perfect spacing while seemingly reading the terrain like a musical score. The 1st defensive line engaged, automated systems tracking incoming threats and responding with simulated fire. Other nations' tanks began taking hits, their systems registering kills and forcing them to withdraw. The casualty count climbed rapidly. Ghost Battalion suffered 0 losses. "Remarkable," whispered a British officer. "How are they predicting the defensive responses so accurately?" "They're not predicting," James explained quietly. "They're listening." The Ghosts reached the first line and executed what appeared to be a choreographed ballet of breakthrough maneuvers. No 2 tanks followed identical paths, yet they moved with collective harmony, finding gaps that shouldn't exist, creating openings where none had been apparent. The first line fell in under 4 minutes. The exercise record had been 12. In the command center, a buzz of incredulous chatter broke out. Officers from other nations leaned forward, adjusting their headsets, demanding confirmation of what they were witnessing. The 2nd defensive line was designed to be impenetrable, a kill box with overlapping fields of fire and automated countermeasures. Conventional doctrine required a lengthy preparatory bombardment before attempting approach. Ghost Battalion didn't pause. They flowed from the first breakthrough directly into the 2nd phase, maintaining momentum while constantly adjusting formation. They weren't following a preset plan. They were adapting in real time, each tank operator reading subtle shifts in terrain and defensive responses, communicating through movement rather than cluttering radio channels. They are using pressure mapping, Sarah explained to the bewildered observers, reading the defensive grid through ground vibrations. The second line collapsed in 7 minutes. No other nation had even reached it. By the time Ghost Battalion approached the final defensive position, the exercise controllers had abandoned their scripts. This was no longer about validating established tactics. They were witnessing the birth of something entirely new. The third line featured autonomous defensive drones, unpredictable movement patterns, and reactive countermeasures. It represented the future of warfare, a system designed to learn and adapt to attackers in real time. The Ghost tanks spread wider, creating what appeared to be vulnerabilities in their formation. The defensive systems responded predictably, concentrating resources on perceived weak points. "There," James said softly, pointing to a specific section of the tactical display. "Watch what happens." A single tank, designated Ghost-led, suddenly accelerated while the others maintained their pace. The defensive system, already committed to its response pattern, couldn't adjust quickly enough. Ghost Lead hit the precise breach point at maximum sustainable pressure, treads maintaining perfect traction through terrain that should have caused catastrophic slippage. The breach lasted exactly 37.8 seconds. When it was over, Ghost Lead had penetrated the center of the defensive position, rendering the entire system compromised. The remaining Ghost tanks flowed through the opening like water, through a broken dam, smooth and inevitable. Exercise complete. Total time: 18 minutes, 22 seconds. Previous record: 3 hours, 47 minutes. The command center fell silent. Then, a slow ripple of applause began, building to thunderous appreciation. Commanders from 24 nations stood in recognition of what they'd just witnessed, the future of armored warfare unfolding before their eyes. "Who drove Ghost-led?" asked a German general, his voice barely containing his awe. Sarah checked the roster display. "Lieutenant Emily Blackwood." "I want to meet this Lieutenant Blackwood immediately," the general declared. "That might be difficult, sir," Sarah replied with the faintest smile. "She's already left the field." The post-exercise analysis became the most requested training document in military history. Every nation wanted to understand what they'd witnessed. Ghost Battalion's performance wasn't just superior. It represented a paradigm shift. James found himself suddenly in demand, conducting briefings for military leaders around the world. The Donovan method was no longer an American tactical curiosity. It had become the new standard against which all armored operations would be measured. 2 months after Operation Sandstorm, James received a visitor in his office at the Pentagon. The young woman wore standard fatigues without rank insignia, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She didn't introduce herself, simply placed a folded piece of paper on his desk. "Lieutenant Blackwood, I presume," James said, not looking up from his computer. "For official purposes," she replied. James finally raised his eyes. "You drove beautifully at Sandstorm. I had a good teacher." "We all did." James unfolded the paper. It contained map coordinates and a time, nothing else. "What's this?" "An invitation." "From?" The woman smiled slightly. "You already know." After she left, James sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the coordinates. They led to a remote location in the Nevada desert. The time was 3 days away. He made his travel arrangements immediately. The location proved to be an abandoned airfield, its runways cracked and weathered by decades of desert sun. James arrived 30 minutes early, parking his rented SUV beside the dilapidated control tower. No other vehicles were visible. At precisely the appointed time, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. James watched through binoculars as it approached, gradually resolving into a single tank. An Abrams, but unlike any he'd seen before. Its profile was subtly modified, its traditional camouflage replaced by a matte gray finish that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The tank stopped 50 meters away. Its engine idled with a sound that seemed impossibly quiet for such a massive machine. The commander's hatch opened, and a figure emerged. Elena Donovan hadn't changed much in 3 years. Her movements were still precise, economical. She climbed down from the tank with fluid grace and walked toward him, removing her helmet as she approached. "Major Harris," she said, extending her hand. James shook it. "It's Colonel now, actually." "Congratulations." Her smile was genuine but brief. "Thank you for coming." "How could I not? You've become something of a legend." "That was never the goal." "I know." She gestured toward a small shade structure set up near the control tower. "Shall we talk?" They sat in canvas chairs, the vast desert stretching around them. Elena poured water from a thermos into 2 cups, handed one to James. "Your methods have transformed tank warfare," James said after a moment. "Ghost Battalion's performance at Sandstorm was unlike anything the military has ever seen." "They did well," she acknowledged. "But they're still following instructions, still executing techniques they've been taught." "You're saying there's more?" "There's always more, James." She looked toward her tank, its unique silhouette shimmering in the desert heat. "What you saw at Sandstorm was just the beginning. The military wants you back, official channels this time. Whatever terms you want. I didn't invite you here to negotiate my return." James studied her face. "Then why?" "Because what's coming will require more than new techniques. It will demand a completely new understanding of what armored warfare can be." She handed him a tablet. On it was a technical schematic unlike anything he'd seen before. Not just a modified tank design, but an entirely new approach to ground combat systems. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "The future. But not one the current military structure is ready to embrace. Try me." For the next hour, Elena outlined her vision. It wasn't just about better training or modified equipment. She described an entirely new combat philosophy, one that treated armored divisions not as collections of individual fighting vehicles, but as a single adaptive organism. Tanks communicating through pressure waves in the ground rather than vulnerable radio transmissions. Breakthrough patterns that evolved in real time based on collective sensory input. Operators selected not for aggression but for sensitivity and synchronization abilities. "This is revolutionary," James said when she finished. "It's necessary. The nature of warfare is changing faster than traditional military thinking can adapt." "And you want me to present this to command?" Elena shook her head. "They wouldn't understand. Not yet." She took back the tablet. "I'm building something, James. Something outside the system." "A private army?" he asked, alarmed. "A proving ground. A place where these ideas can develop without institutional resistance. When it's ready, when it's undeniable, then I'll share it." "That sounds dangerously close to..." "To what?" "Treason?" Her eyes flashed. "Everything I'm doing is to protect our country, not threaten it. But innovation rarely comes from within established power structures." James couldn't argue with that. Elena's greatest breakthrough had come only after the system had pushed her aside. "What do you want from me, then?" he asked. "Intelligence. Awareness of emerging threats that might require intervention before traditional forces can respond. And occasionally, the right people." "People like Lieutenant Blackwood?" Elena smiled. "Emily found us. Others will too. The ones who understand what we're building." "And what exactly are you building, Elena?" She looked out across the desert, her expression unreadable. "A capability, for when it's needed." "That's vague." "It has to be." She turned back to him. "There are threats developing that existing military doctrine can't address. Threats that require new thinking, new approaches. You could pursue that within the system. I could help make that happen. The system that sidelined me? That laughed at my methods until they were proven beyond doubt?" She shook her head. "Some innovations need space to develop on their own terms." James considered her words carefully. "What you're suggesting exists in a gray area, legally speaking. I'm aware. That's why I need someone I trust on the inside. Someone who understands the bigger picture." The proposition hung between them. James had built his career on following rules, respecting chain of command. What Elena proposed challenged everything about his professional identity. And yet, he had witnessed firsthand the transformative power of her methods. Had seen how her thinking, once embraced, had revolutionized an entire branch of warfare. If she believed something more was needed, something the current system couldn't accommodate, didn't he owe it to the country to at least consider her perspective? "I won't compromise classified information," he said finally. "I won't betray my oath. I would never ask you to. All I'm suggesting is awareness, keeping your eyes open to situations where conventional approaches might fail, and letting me know when those situations arise. And if I refuse, then we part ways here. No hard feelings." She smiled slightly. "I'd still be grateful for everything you've done to advance the methods." James stood, walking a few paces away, thinking. The desert wind whipped around him, carrying the scent of sage and dust. When he turned back, his decision was made. "I'll keep my eyes open," he said. "Nothing more. If something arises that conventional forces can't handle, I'll find a way to let you know. That's all I ask." She rose and extended her hand again. "Thank you, James." They shook hands, sealing an arrangement that existed beyond any official protocol or regulation. "One more thing," James said. "Ghost Battalion. Do they know?" "About you, I mean?" "Not officially, but legends have a way of spreading." She smiled. "I visit, occasionally. Watch their training. Leave suggestions. Like a ghost." "Something like that." They walked back toward her tank. Before climbing aboard, Elena paused. "The world is changing, James. Faster than most realize. Traditional power structures, traditional thinking. They won't be enough for what's coming. And you'll be ready?" "We'll try to be." She donned her helmet. "Watch for the signs. You'll know when it's time." She ascended the tank with practiced efficiency, disappearing into the commander's hatch. The engine rumbled to life, quieter than should be possible for such power. As the tank began to move, James noticed something he'd missed before, a small insignia painted on its side. Not a military designation or unit number, but a simple geometric pattern. A ghost rendered in angles and lines. The tank accelerated across the desert floor, moving with that distinctive Donovan rhythm. Not forcing its way across the terrain, but flowing with it, reading its contours, becoming part of its pattern. James watched until it disappeared over the horizon, carrying with it a woman whose rejection by the system had not diminished her, but transformed her. Elena Donovan had not been broken by institutional blindness. She had transcended it, creating something entirely new in the process. As he drove back toward civilization, James found himself reflecting on what makes true innovation possible. Not accolades or official recognition. Not institutional support or established pathways. But the quiet conviction of those who see beyond current limitations. Those willing to work in silence, perfecting their craft not for glory, but because excellence demands nothing less. Elena's greatest legacy wasn't just a method of operating tanks. It was a philosophy of approaching challenges, of seeing barriers not as obstacles, but as opportunities for transformation, of understanding that sometimes the most powerful position isn't at the center of the system, but at its edge, where new possibilities can emerge. The military would continue to study and implement the Donovan method. Ghost Battalion would continue breaking records and redefining what was possible in armored warfare. But the true revolution, the one Elena was building in the desert, remained hidden, developing on its own terms, waiting for the moment when it would be needed. And when that moment came, James knew she would be ready, not because she sought the spotlight or craved recognition, but because she understood a fundamental truth. Real excellence doesn't ask permission. It prepares, it perfects, it persists. And when the time comes, it drives. 2 years after the Nevada meeting, the world changed. What began as regional skirmishes in Eastern Europe rapidly escalated into a coordinated assault against NATO defenses. A coalition of hostile states deployed next-generation autonomous armor, tanks that operated without human drivers, guided by artificial intelligence and networked in swarm formations that overwhelmed conventional defenses. The first line of NATO forces fell within hours, the second line within a day. Casualties mounted as traditional armored divisions found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned by machines that didn't tire, didn't fear, and operated with inhuman precision. Colonel James Harris stood in the Pentagon's Crisis Command Center, watching tactical displays turn progressively red as hostile forces advanced. The room hummed with tense voices and hurried footsteps as military leaders scrambled to formulate a response. "Ghost Battalion is our best option," James said, addressing General Mitchell, the Joint Chiefs Chairman. "They're the only unit trained to handle adaptive threats of this nature." Mitchell shook his head. "They're already deployed along the southern corridor, taking heavy losses like everyone else." "Then we need to change our approach entirely," James insisted. "Conventional tactics aren't working against these autonomous systems." "What do you suggest, Colonel?" Mitchell's voice carried the weight of 26 hours without sleep. "Because right now, we're looking at the collapse of our entire eastern defensive position within 48 hours. James hesitated, then made his decision. "There may be another option, sir, but it's unconventional. We're well past concerning ourselves with convention, Harris. What are you thinking?" "I need secure communications and authorization to contact an asset outside normal channels." Mitchell studied him for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Whatever you need, just make it happen fast." 20 minutes later, James sat alone in a secure communications room. He entered the coordinates for a transmission frequency that didn't exist in any military database, then typed a simple message. "Breach point compromised. Autonomous armor. NATO Eastern Front. Conventional response failing." He added the code phrase Elena had given him 2 years earlier. "Ghost lead required." The response came 3 minutes later, just 2 words. "Coordinates received." James returned to the crisis center. He didn't mention his communication. Instead, he focused on conventional response strategies, working with the staff to coordinate what resources remained. All the while, a silent countdown ran in his mind. 18 hours later, as NATO forces prepared for what might be their final defensive stand, a communications officer approached General Mitchell. "Sir, we're picking up unusual activity behind enemy lines, approximately 60 kilometers east of the front." Mitchell moved to the tactical display. "What kind of activity?" "Unknown, sir. Our satellite coverage is spotty due to electronic countermeasures, but we're seeing significant disruption in enemy movement patterns. Multiple autonomous units going offline or behaving erratically." James felt his pulse quicken, but kept his expression neutral. "Patch through any visual feeds you can get," Mitchell ordered. The main screen flickered, showing grainy satellite imagery of the battlefield. The picture quality was poor, distorted by jamming measures, but the pattern was unmistakable. Enemy armor units were breaking formation, some turning against each other, others simply stopping. And moving through their disorganized ranks was something else. A formation of tanks unlike any in NATO's arsenal. "What am I looking at?" Mitchell demanded. "Those aren't ours." "No, sir," James confirmed quietly. "They're not." The unknown tanks moved with synchronized precision, flowing through enemy formations like water around rocks. They didn't engage in traditional combat maneuvers. Instead, they seemed to be inducing confusion in the autonomous systems, creating patterns of movement that disrupted the enemy's network communication. "They're using the ground," James explained, unable to contain his amazement, sending vibration patterns through the terrain that confused the enemy's sensors. "Who are they?" Mitchell asked. "Someone who understood this threat was coming, someone who prepared for it." The unidentified tanks, 12 in total, continued their advance, not toward NATO lines, but deeper into enemy territory. They moved in a formation that constantly shifted, never presenting a stable target profile. Wherever they passed, enemy autonomous systems faltered. "They're going for the control node," James realized aloud. "The central AI hub coordinating the autonomous units." Mitchell turned to him sharply. "How could they possibly know its location? Our best intelligence hasn't been able to pinpoint it." James didn't answer. He didn't need to. On screen, the mysterious formation accelerated, converging on a point that had appeared insignificant on previous intelligence assessments. Their movement was no longer just tactical. It was beautiful, a choreographed dance of power and precision. "Look at their speed," whispered a tactical officer. "They're maintaining maximum pressure over terrain that's stalling our own units." James nodded. They're not fighting the ground, they're reading it. The lead tank, slightly different in profile from the others, suddenly broke formation, accelerating toward what appeared to be a heavily defended command center. Enemy fire concentrated on it immediately, but the tank didn't evade. Instead, it adjusted its path minutely, threading through the defensive grid with impossible precision. "That's..." Mitchell began, then stopped, unable to articulate what he was witnessing. "That's the breach point," James finished for him. "The real one." The lead tank hit the enemy position at maximum speed, holding its line through concentrated fire, maintaining perfect tread tension across broken ground. Behind it, the remaining tanks shifted formation, creating a protective corridor. The breach lasted exactly 37.8 seconds. When it was over, the enemy command center was neutralized. Across the battlefield, the autonomous tanks began shutting down, their controlling intelligence destroyed. "Get me communication with those tanks," Mitchell ordered. "I want to know who they are and who authorized this operation." But James knew there would be no response. Already, the mysterious formation was withdrawing, moving with the same fluid precision with which they had arrived. Within minutes, they had disappeared from satellite coverage. The crisis center erupted in controlled chaos as officers attempted to understand what had just happened and how to capitalize on the sudden vulnerability of enemy forces. James stood quietly at the back, watching the tactical display shift from desperate red to cautious yellow. Mitchell found him there an hour later. "You know something about what happened out there," the general said. "It wasn't a question." "I know that sometimes the solutions we need come from outside the system," James replied carefully. "Those weren't military tanks. At least, not any military I recognize." "No, sir." Mitchell studied him for a long moment. "We're going to have a conversation about this when the crisis is contained. A very detailed conversation." "Yes, sir. I look forward to it." But that conversation never happened. In the chaos of the conflict's resolution, in the political aftermath and reconstruction efforts, the mysterious intervention became a footnote, acknowledged but unexplained. NATO forces reclaimed lost territory, conventional units received credit for the victory, and the official record noted only that tactical advantages were achieved through multiple coordinated efforts. 3 months later, James received another invitation. Different coordinates this time, a remote location in the Cascade Mountains. He arranged leave and traveled there alone. The facility was hidden in plain sight, a former mining operation repurposed with subtle efficiency. No obvious security measures, no visible personnel, just a series of structures built into the mountainside, their architecture blending with the natural terrain. Elena met him at the entrance, dressed in standard work clothes, her manner as composed as ever. "You came," she said simply. "After what I saw, how could I not?" She led him inside, through corridors carved from the mountain itself. The facility expanded as they progressed, revealing workshops, training areas, and simulation chambers unlike anything in conventional military infrastructure. "How many people?" James asked. 87. All volunteers. All people who saw beyond conventional limitations. "Like Lieutenant Blackwood?" Elena nodded. "Emily leads our field operations now. She has a natural gift for the work." They entered what appeared to be the facility's command center, a spacious room with advanced displays showing global monitoring systems. A dozen people worked at various stations, their focus absolute. "What you did in Eastern Europe," James began, "it saved thousands of lives, maybe prevented a much larger conflict." "That was the intention. But why disappear afterward? Why not take credit? The military would embrace what you've built now. They've seen what it can do." Elena smiled faintly. "That's not how meaningful change happens, James. The moment we become official, we become constrained by the same thinking that couldn't envision this threat in the first place." She gestured to a large tactical display showing global hotspots and emerging threats. "We're not interested in parades or commendations. We're interested in being ready for what comes next. And there is always something next." "The military is adapting," James argued. "Ghost Battalion has incorporated many of your innovations. New training protocols are being developed based on what was observed in the conflict. That's good, necessary even, but they're still playing catch-up, still responding to the last threat rather than anticipating the next one." She led him to a different section of the facility, a massive hangar where technicians worked on vehicles that only vaguely resembled conventional tanks. Their design was radical, emphasizing different principles than traditional armored warfare. "This is the next evolution," Elena explained. "Vehicles that don't just move across terrain but communicate with it. Systems that read the environment as a living entity rather than an obstacle." James stared in amazement. "How do you fund all this?" "There are people with resources who understand what we're doing. People who recognize that sometimes the most important innovations happen outside established channels." "Private military contractors," James said, a note of disapproval in his voice. "Partners," Elena corrected, "who understand that what we're building isn't about profit or power. It's about capability, about being ready when conventional approaches fail." They continued through the facility, James gradually comprehending the scope of what Elena had created. This wasn't just an alternative approach to tank warfare. It was an entirely new philosophy of response to emerging threats, adaptive, intuitive, operating according to principles that conventional military thinking couldn't accommodate. In a quiet moment, standing on an observation platform overlooking a training exercise, James finally asked the question that had been troubling him. "Why did you invite me here, Elena? You've kept this secret for years. Why reveal it now?" She turned to face him directly. "Because the world is changing faster than institutions can adapt. Because what happened in Eastern Europe isn't an anomaly. It's a preview. And because we need someone on the inside who understands what we're doing and why. You want me to be your advocate? I want you to be a bridge. When the next crisis comes, and it will come, I want you to know what's possible beyond conventional response." James considered this. His career had been built on respecting the system, working within established protocols. Yet he had witnessed firsthand how that system had failed to anticipate a threat that Elena had prepared for years in advance. "There are protocols, chains of command," he began, "all of which serve important purposes," Elena acknowledged, "until they become obstacles to necessary action. I'm not asking you to subvert your oath or betray your principles. I'm asking you to keep your mind open to possibilities that exist beyond conventional thinking." She gestured toward the training ground below, where operators moved through exercises that bore little resemblance to standard military drills. "These people aren't rebels or mercenaries. They're innovators who couldn't find space for their ideas within established structures. They're here because they believe in being ready, truly ready, for threats that conventional thinking can't yet envision." James watched as the trainees executed maneuvers that defied traditional tactics, moving with a synchronicity that seemed almost prescient. "What happens when you encounter a threat you can't handle?" he asked. "When you need the resources only a nation-state can provide?" "Then we adapt, we evolve." That's the fundamental principle here. Not adherence to doctrine, but continuous evolution based on emerging realities. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture uncharacteristically personal. "The system needs people like you, James. People who understand protocol and respect chain of command. But it also needs to know when those things aren't enough, when something more is required. And you think I can be that connection? I think you already are. Your message during the crisis, you sent it knowing it violated protocol. You did it because you recognized the situation demanded something beyond conventional response." She was right, and they both knew it. In that critical moment, James had chosen effectiveness over procedure, lives over protocol. "What are you asking of me exactly?" "Awareness, understanding, and when necessary." "Only when necessary. Communication." James took a deep breath, looking out over the facility that represented both a rejection of the system and a profound commitment to its fundamental purpose. "Protection. I won't compromise classified information," he said finally. "I won't betray operational security. I would never ask you to. But I will keep the channel open. And when another situation arises where conventional response isn't sufficient, I'll find a way to let you know." Elena nodded, satisfied. "That's all I ask." As they walked back through the facility, James observed the people working in various sections, engineers, tacticians, operators. They moved with purpose, with conviction. These weren't disillusioned rebels, but dedicated professionals who had found a different path toward the same goal, protection of what mattered. "You've built something remarkable here," he acknowledged. "We've built it together," Elena corrected. "Everyone here contributes." Everyone here belongs. That, James realized, was perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of what Elena had created. Not just the technology or the tactics, but the culture, one where contribution was valued over rank, innovation over adherence, effectiveness over protocol. It was what the military aspired to be at its best, but often failed to achieve under the weight of its own traditions and hierarchies. At the facility entrance, as they prepared to part ways, James had one final question. That day at the breach point, when everyone else failed and you stepped in, did you know then what you would build? Elena considered this. I knew what was possible when people are allowed to excel on their own terms. The rest, she smiled slightly. The rest evolved naturally from that understanding. James nodded. The next time you deploy, there won't be the element of surprise. The military will be watching for you. Good, Elena said simply. Let them watch. Let them learn. They shook hands and James departed, carrying with him a vision of possibility that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional thinking. As he drove away from the mountain facility, he reflected on the journey that had brought them both to this point. Elena Donovan had been rejected by a system that couldn't recognize her value. Rather than breaking her, that rejection had liberated her to create something extraordinary, not in opposition to the system's purpose, but in service of its deepest intention. In the months and years that followed, James maintained his position within the military hierarchy, advancing to general and eventually serving on the Joint Chiefs. Throughout his career, he advocated for innovation, for openness to unconventional thinking, for recognition that sometimes the most valuable contributions come from unexpected sources. He never directly mentioned Elena's organization, never revealed its location or detailed its capabilities. But he created space within the system for its influence to be felt, through training reforms, through tactical evolutions, through a gradually shifting culture that valued effectiveness over adherence to doctrine. And on those rare occasions when conventional response proved insufficient, when emerging threats demanded capabilities beyond established parameters, a secure channel remained open, a way to bridge the gap between what the system could provide and what the situation required. Elena's organization deployed rarely, selectively, appearing only in those critical moments when all other options had failed. They never sought recognition, never claimed credit. They simply executed with that distinctive precision, that harmonious synchronicity that had first manifested in a single perfect breach years earlier. They became known by many names in military circles. The Ghost Battalion, though they had no connection to the official unit. The Cascade Group, the Donovan Contingent. Rumors circulated about their capabilities, their technology, their methods. Some dismissed them as myth, a convenient explanation for otherwise inexplicable battlefield outcomes. But James knew the truth, knew that somewhere in the mountains, Elena continued to evolve her methods, continued to prepare for threats that conventional thinking couldn't yet envision, continued to embody the principle that had defined her from the beginning. Excellence doesn't ask permission, it prepares, it persists, it performs. In the end, perhaps that was Elena Donovan's greatest legacy, not the tactics she developed or the organization she built, but the reminder that true innovation rarely comes from within established structures. It emerges from those with the courage to follow their own understanding, to perfect their craft in silence, to value effectiveness over recognition. From those who understand that sometimes the most powerful position isn't at the center of the system, but at its edge, where new possibilities can emerge. From those who don't ask permission to excel, who simply do, and when the moment demands it, when lives are at stake and conventional approaches fail, they drive the breach that others thought impossible, not for glory, not for recognition, but because excellence demands nothing less. If this story resonates with you, perhaps you recognize something of Elena in yourself. Perhaps you too have felt the constraints of systems that couldn't recognize your unique contribution. Perhaps you too have stood at that crucial crossroads, choosing between acceptance within established parameters or the courage to forge your own path. Remember Elena's example. Excellence doesn't always wear insignia. Innovation doesn't always follow approved channels. Sometimes the most valuable contributions come from those who were told no and responded by building something better. Wherever you are, whatever system you operate within or beyond, know this. Your value isn't determined by recognition. Your contribution isn't validated by approval. Your excellence exists independent of permission. Prepare in silence. Perfect your craft. And when the moment comes, when everything depends on what you can do, drive. The world will remember what you did, even if it never knew your name. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.